That's all she could hear, see, and feel. Chaos was everywhere pressing in around her, suffocating her. The questions were loud, coming at her from every direction. Flashlights from cameras blinded her, each flash making her vision blur. She could barely think. People yelled over each other, fighting to get closer, their voices blending into an unbearable roar. She couldn't even make out what anyone was saying at first. It was too much, too loud. Mrs. John, is it true your marriage is purely for publicity? Did you know about the financial troubles in his company before the wedding? Why are you never seen together in public? Is Jungkook seeing someone else? She almost flinched at the last question that was thrown at her. Breathe. Don't flinch. Don't react. They want a reaction. The second trial ended today, and somehow it was worse than the first one. More proofs and facts thrown at each other in the courtroom until the court dismissed. And now outside of court it was worse than inside. If she didn't pass out from headache inside, she surely will hear if she didn't make her way out of this crowd. Someone bumped on her shoulder hard, almost knocking her balance out, but she was quick enough to stood straight. She paused in the middle of the crowd, unsure of where to go, unsure if she could even take another step. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides, trying to keep control. Suddenly a body pressed against her back, solid and warm, shielding her from the crowd. She held her breath. The yelling didn't stop, but it shifted instantly. All the questions, the flashing cameras, the prying eyes, they weren't on her anymore. They were on him. Mr. John, why haven't you addressed the rumors about your marriage? Do you think you can take your company back? Are you really involved in illegal matters? Wasn't Seo Jae-young your close friend? Isn't Seo Jae-young was like you father older son? Back away, he said roughly. Give us some space. But the reporters throw more questions at him. Mr. John, why haven't you addressed the rumors about your marriage? Jungkook glared at them, which was enough to silence most of them, but he still answered. Our marriage is none of your concern. The last words came more of a growl. He was clearly pissed by the tone of it. But Mr. John, there have been rumors suggesting your relationship is purely contractual. Is there any truth to that? The rumors are baseless, and I won't explain anything further about our relationship. Now back away. The next second his hands wrapped around her wrist, tight but not to hurt her, still his grip was a little too tight. She didn't hiss, just letting him drag her. All she wanted was to disappear from the crowd. They reached to his car and he unlocked it, yanking the door open for her. My car is on the other side, she started, her voice barely audible over the ringing in her ears. Get inside. He spat, which felt like command. Her pride bristled at the rough tone, but for once she didn't argue. She slid into the passenger seat, and the door shut behind her, muting the chaos outside. Jungkook got in moments later. He started the engine without looking at her, his jaw clenched so tightly she thought it might crack. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the leather. She wanted to say something, anything to break the tension. Her chest felt heavy, her throat tight, but the words wouldn't come out. Finally, she forced them out. You didn't have to. Keep quiet, he snapped. She bit her lip, swallowing the rest of her sentence. He was angry, angrier than she'd seen him. She sank back into the seat, her fist clenching on her lap. It's been 3 weeks since the gala. 3 long, unbearable weeks. 3 weeks of him avoiding her at home, of walking past her like she didn't exist, and of her swallowing her pride every time she tried to reach out only to find him gone. He stopped talking to her altogether. Well, not like he was talking to her before that. The gala night was her only hope, but nothing changed even after that. He wasn't home much, and when he was, he barely acknowledged her presence. She hated it. She hated the silence his absence brought in the empty house. She turned her head slightly, watching him as he drove. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and she wondered if he was holding back his words, trying to keep himself in check. But all that aside, he looked worn out. She didn't had courage to look at him properly when she got the glimpse of him walking inside the courtroom. And even inside, asking him questions like he was a criminal, she couldn't met his eyes. Knowing she do drop everything right there. If she look at his face. Nothing could make her sway from her decisions. But Jungkook, he was another case. He made her doubt her decision every single day and she was losing her mind. Thank you, she said quietly. She felt small in that moment, how his anger seemed to shrink her into someone she didn't even recognize. But she had to say it. Who knew when they'd talk again? He clearly didn't want to see her, let alone speak. You think I did it for you? He didn't even look at her, his eyes glued to the road. The scoff that followed made her stomach twist. I did it for myself, don't mistake it for anything more than what it was. I just wanted to shut them up and get out of there. His tone was colder than she ever heard it. I just wanted a little peace. I'm tired of people constantly digging into my life. She stayed quiet, her hands gripping the hem of her dress tightly. He wasn't done. I don't have the time or energy for this mess we call a marriage, he said bluntly, there's so much more I need to focus on, things that actually matter. The last thing I need is more chaos in my life. You could have just left me there. And have them drag my name through the mud even more? No, thanks. The bitterness in his voice made her stop saying anything further. Because what was the point? He wasn't wrong. She turned her face away, staring out the window at the city lights, their glowed up blurring in her vision. She swallowed the lump forming in her throat, refusing to let it show how much his words affected her. You know what, he said suddenly, breaking the quiet. I don't even know why I'm explaining myself to you. Silence fell between them again, heavier this time, suffocating. The sound of the tires on the road was the only thing she could focus on. She wanted to say so many things but knew she couldn't. The words sat on the tip of my tongue, but she swallowed them down. Maybe one day she'd gather the courage to let everything out. To tell him everything she's been holding back, she just hoped that when that day came, it wouldn't be too late. The alarm on her bedside table rang loud enough to shake her skull, pulling her out of the pitiful 2 hours of sleep she managed to get. She groaned, reaching out blindly to silence it. Her head felt heavy, like it's been stuffed with cotton, and her eyes burned from the lack of rest. She used to get at least 5 hours of sleep, sometimes even 6 if she was lucky. But now? Her mind refused to switch off. Every night was the same, staring at the ceiling, tossing and turning, begging her brain to stop racing so she could get just a little peace. But it didn't work. Her head throbbed as if it might explode at any second. The headache was the price that she paid for not resting properly. Rubbing her temples, she grabbed her phone from the nightstand, intending to check the time, but the flood of notifications on the screen caught her eye instead. Social media. She wasn't a big fan of social media, rarely ever used it unless it was for something important, but curiosity got the better of her. Her thumb hesitated before clicking on the notification that has written Jungkook name. And there it was, right at the top, pictures. Pictures of them. The photos were from outside the court 3 days ago. There she was, standing stiff and pale in the middle of a sea of reporters. Another picture of Jungkook standing behind her. Another of him dragging her out of there. Wow, he really doesn't look like he's into her at all, thought. She looks so arrogant. No wonder he's pissed off all the time. Does anyone else think this marriage is fake? She rubbed her temples again, harder this time, to erase the headache building behind her eyes. She didn't bother reading any more captions or comments, didn't need to. She already knew what they were saying. She is listening to it for months. She wasn't sure if she was angry, frustrated, or just exhausted. Maybe all three. This wasn't new. But they didn't know. They didn't know about what goes inside, the silence, the way he looked at her now, cold, so distant, like she was a stranger. They didn't know about the sleepless nights or the weight pressing down on her chest every time she thought about what Jungkook's decision will be. Would he walk in one day and announce his decision? Tell her it was over, that he wanted out. But she forced those thoughts back in the corner of her mind. Jungkook won't leave her, right? But what if? She tossed her phone onto the bed, leaning back and closing her eyes for a moment. But it's not the time to overthink. She already have a lot going on with her. Her phone rang again, dragging her out of her thoughts. She sighed, already dreading whatever was about to come. Picking it up, she glanced at the screen. Unknown number. But she knew exactly who it was. She answered, placing the phone on speaker as she headed to the bathroom. Hello, John Yn. How are you? I hope I didn't interrupt anything. Interesting. She rolled her eyes, twisting the faucet on and splashing cold water onto her face. Cut the formalities, Felix. Tell me you've done the job. Oh, straight to the point. No, I'm good. How are you? No, thank you for taking that time out of your busy schedule. His tone was dry, but she can almost imagine him smirking. I don't have time for emotional bonding, she said, wiping her face with a towel. Did you find anything? There was a pause, and she could almost picture his smug expression through the phone. You know, I don't usually take calls like this. But for you, my dear little cousin, I've made an exception. She sighed, leaning against the counter. Did you find what I asked for? He chuckled. Patience. You always were so impatient. And here I thought that marriage would mellow you out. Felix, she warned, her tone sharper now. All right, all right. There was a faint clicking sound, like he was typing something in the background. Your client isn't as squeaky clean as he pretends to be. You were right about him, there's a lot more rotten under the surface than he lets on. But gathering 10 years worth of dirt on a man like him? It's not as simple as pulling a file. This kind of work takes time. Do you have anything solid yet? She crossed her arms as she paced the small bathroom. Oh, I've plenty. You are going to love it. He's got a whole network of smaller companies under his control. On the surface, they look like harmless investments, small businesses, real estate, a few import-export firms. But when you dig deeper, he's using these companies to launder money. Lots of it. He pumps small sums into them on paper, but the profits they report are way beyond reasonable. The surplus is funneled into offshore accounts, hidden under shell companies. He's making a killing, and no one's blinking an eye because it's all so neatly done. She leaned against the counter, processing the information. Go on. Oh, the next piece of information is interesting. He's been cheating on his wife, 4 years. Should I act surprised? She said dryly. Oh, but this is. He's got a mistress living in England in an apartment he pays for, fully furnished, all expenses covered. And get this, the apartment is under one of his shell company's names. A neat little arrangement, don't you think? Hides the affair, hides the money. I don't care about his personal life. You know what I want. I know what you want. And yes, I'm getting closer. It's all about the connections, that his financial dealings lead to some very interesting names. People who have been, let's say, instrumental in keeping him untouchable. Politicians, law enforcement, even a judge or two. If you want to bring him down, you'll need to sever those ties. And I'm working on it. Good. Keep digging and update me as soon as you have something concrete. Not so fast, Felix said. I've given you quite a bit already, haven't I? Now that it's your turn, little cousin. She scoffed. You want something in return? You are my cousin? Exactly, he said smoothly. Which is why I'm even doing this for you. But come on, Yn. You know how this works. I'm risking a lot by poking around in CO's business. If he finds out someone's sniffing around his secrets, it won't just be your problem. So yes, I want something in return. What do you want? She asked, already bracing herself. Oh, nothing too difficult, he said, his tone casual. Just a little favor for a favor. There's a file locked away in the Seoul National Bank's private archives. I've been trying to get my hands on it for months, but their security is tighter than a vice. You, on the other hand, have connections. You could get it for me. She frowned. And what's in this file? Nothing you need to worry about. Let's just say it's personal. You get me that file, and I'll make sure you have every evidence in your hands before the final trial. She sucked in a breath. Felix was the best at what he did, one of the only people she trusted, hardly, to handle this kind of work. But he never did anything for free. And if he was asking for this, it meant he couldn't get it himself. But this was one of the main reasons she hated taking favor from someone else. They are ready with their big mouths to ask things she hates doing. Come on, little cousin, you are thinking too hard. Are you forgetting for who you are doing this? 2 people. She closed her eyes for a moment, before exhaling. Fine. I'll see what I can do. See? I knew you'd come around. I'll send you the details. And don't worry, I'll keep digging on my end. I've got a feeling we're just scratching the surface and that there's a lot more to discover. Just keep me updated. Of course. I'll NYN, don't just call me when you need something. You can call me anytime. I know you're not a big fan of us, but we're still family. She froze, her grip tightening around the edge of the sink. Yeah. Family, she scoffed, bitterness seeping in her tone. I wish you guys knew that word when we needed you the most. It's been 8 years, YN. He is guilty, his voice softened, which was rare. No matter how many years have passed, the hurt he caused us would never go away. She couldn't stop the lump that started to form in her throat. And he should be guilty. That's the least he could do. The line went silent on the other side. She cleared her throat, forcing every emotion back that started to rise. Call me when your work is done, and I'll do yours. With that, she ended the call, tossing her phone onto the counter. The bathroom was quiet again, except for the sound of her breathing, shallow and uneven. She sucked in a sharp breath, closing her eyes. The ache in her chest pressed harder like a stone for a moment before she exhaled, forcing it out, burying it where she couldn't feel it anymore. She opened her eyes to meet her reflection. The woman staring back at her looked calm. Like nothing could touch her. But she knew better. She was just better at hiding it now. That coldness was her shield. It's been like this for years, ever since she learned that emotions only made you weak. Vulnerable. And the world? It wasn't kind to weakness. People would eat you alive the moment you showed them even a crack. She'd seen it happen too many times in front of her. So, she learned the hard way. Better to be cold. Better to give nothing than to give too much and lose everything, but that didn't mean the cracks weren't there. It was just sealed tight, behind a mask she wore every day. Do you prepare the file I ask for? Jungkook asked as he walked into his office after a tiring meeting. Miho scrabbled behind him, trying to match his pace. Yes, sir. I've compiled everything you requested. The latest updates are in the blue folder. He nodded, already pulling off his coat as he approached the desk. Tossing it over the back of his chair as he rolled up the sleeves of his shirt. Settling into his chair, he reached for the blue folder, but something on the desk caught his attention. A small cup and a neatly wrapped box sat in the center of the otherwise clean surface. It wasn't his, and it certainly wasn't work-related. Frowning, he moved toward it. The cup had the faint scent of espresso, and the box. He opened it to find macaroons, donuts, arranged perfectly in a pattern. His fingers brushed over the rim of the cup before he noticed the note stuck to the side of the cup. He plucked the note off. It was plain and clean, written in a handwriting he recognized immediately. Don't skip your caffeine, it's dangerous for people around you. Eat some sweet and don't overwork yourself. He stared at the note for a longer moment, reading it few times over and over again before calling his secretary name. He was already turning to leave, but he stopped in his tracks, stiffening slightly. Yes, sir. YN was here. His tone wasn't curious, it was sharp and demanding. How do you? Yes. Your wife came by earlier. She was inside my office, and no one thought to tell me? He narrowed his eyes. No, sir. She didn't come inside. You were in a meeting, and she said she was in a hurry. She just told me to put it on your desk, he explained, words tumbling out quickly. He looked back at the box of sweets, brow furrowing. The last time he had these specific donuts was months ago, early in their marriage. He ordered them once, late at night, and didn't even mention how much he liked them. There was no way she could have noticed or remembered that. The thought that she remembered something so small irritated him more than it should have. But he wasn't really sure it was irritation or something else. Take these away, his voice was sharp enough to make the other boy flinch. What? He asked, blinking like he hadn't heard him correctly. Distribute them to the staff. Or you can take these home. There was a silence before he stammered out, but Mrs. John specifically told me to let her know if you ate them or not. His jaw tightened, irritation crawling under his skin. He despised when someone dared to question him further, especially about things that didn't concern them. Aren't you getting awfully comfortable meddling in private matters? You're hired as a secretary for this company, not a messenger. Or do you want me to fire you? The boy froze, his face turning as pale as the white shirt he had chosen to wear today. And no, sir. Then do as you're told. He swallowed hard, rushing forward to grab the box from the desk. His hands trembled so badly that the files he was holding slipped from his grip, falling on the floor. Sorry, sir, he bent down quickly to collect the papers. He muttered apologies again and again. Jungkook watched him for a second, his lips pressed into a thin line. The boy wasn't efficient, he was clumsy, nervous, and jittery. Jungkook don't even look that intimidating, did he? But this boy acted as if he was staring down a monster. Why had he even chosen Miho as his secretary? The kid was clearly afraid of his own shadow. The younger straightened up again, clutching the files close to his chest like it would shield him from the fire his boss was emitting like a dragon. He reached for the box of sweets once more. Leave them. Miho blinked, startled. What? I said leave them, Jungkook repeated. And get out of my office. But Bo, Jungkook gaze snapped up. One look, dead glare, was enough to shut him up instantly and bolted out of the door. Silence. Finally, he exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. The leather of his chair creaked under his weight, his eyes falling to the untouched box and the coffee cup. Why did this small gesture get under his skin so much? It was just a cup of coffee and some stupid sweets. But the fact that she remembered, he reached for the note again. As he stared at her handwriting, he thought about throwing the box into the trash. But his hand didn't move. And he felt the guilt crawling inside his bones before he reminded himself that he won't go soft again. She had already done her part of reminding him that he meant nothing to her, this marriage mean nothing to her. He gave her a chance to explain herself that might have justified her actions, but she didn't, then be it. He crushed the note in his fist before aiming towards the trash bin in the corner of the room. It landed perfectly. He pushed the box and the cup to the edge of his desk, far enough to stop them from invading his space, but not close enough to shove them off entirely. He won't let her actions melt him anymore. This is good, YN said, tapping her pen on the document, but you're focusing too much on the emotional angle of the case. That works for appeals, but not here. You need to build your argument based on hard facts. Remember, judges appreciate logic, not emotions. You fought this case with emotions, you will lose. Jaiwo nodded quickly, jotting down notes in her notepad. So, I should focus more on the financial discrepancies? Yes, and don't forget to cross-check the dates. If there's even one inconsistency, the opposing counsel will rip you apart. Be precise. Yes, ma'am. Good. Now, for the deposition, don't let the witness lead you. Stay in cont. The door to her office slammed open a little loudly. Jaiwoo startled. Yen looked up to see who had the audacity to barge in her room like that. But wasn't surprised when she saw the other person's face. Ma'am, Jaiwoo looked uneasy. You can go. We'll continue this discussion later. Jaiwoo hesitated for a moment before bowing slightly and gathering her things. She hurried out of the office. Seo stepped further inside like he owned the office, with a smug smile she hates the most. Yen picked up her phone casually, her thumb scrolling through her emails as if he wasn't even there. Seo didn't seem to mind. He grabbed the chair opposite of her desk and sat down, his eyes fixed on her. As far as I recall, we didn't have a meeting scheduled today. She placed her phone down, folding her hands neatly on the desk as she met his gaze. Nor did you inform me about your sudden visit. Jae-young picked up the pen lying on her desk, the one she was working with earlier, began spinning it between his fingers lazily. I wanted to surprise you. Yen leaned back in her chair, arching an eyebrow. I didn't know we had the kind of relationship where surprises were appropriate. You do realize this is my office, right? Of course, his smile widening. But as for relationships, we could always develop. Point 1. That way, you wouldn't mind me dropping by unannounced. Her jaw clenched slightly, but she forced herself not to lose her control. Mind if I remind you that you have a wife waiting for you at home? She might appreciate your daily visits more than I do. Jaeyoung laughed. She wants him to be in prison for having that kind of laugh, and that's exactly why I like you. You know exactly what to say, every damn time. If you have something important to discuss, say it. Otherwise, don't waste my time. Always so businesslike. Fine, let's talk business. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a black folder, placing it on the desk between them. Her eyes flicked to it briefly before returning to his face. What's this? Something that requires your attention. Open it and find out. Her eyes narrowed as she picked up the folder, opening it. But her expression darkened as soon as she scanned the contents. She closed it with a sharp snap and slid it back toward him. No, she said firmly. Seo raised an eyebrow. You didn't even read it. I don't need to. The answer is no. His smile faded slightly, replaced with annoyance. Take it. I said no, she repeated. He leaned forward, his expression hardening. You don't have a choice, Kim Yen, but this isn't a request. You either take it or... I have every choice to say no, she cut him off. And you can't come here and blackmail me. If anything, you should be grateful I even agreed to take your case. His eyebrow quirked up, the corner of his lip twitching as he chuckled mockingly. We had a deal, may I remind you? You can't back out now. I'm so close to winning this case. She crossed my arms, meeting his gaze without a flinch. I surely remember our deal, and it didn't involve this. She jabbed my finger at the file. So, it's better if you don't start any new games. Otherwise, I'll drop your case entirely. His smirk disappeared. You can't drop my case, and we both know that. He leaned forward. Do you think I don't know the law, Miss Kim? She calmly stood from her seat, gathering her things as she prepared to leave. It was almost time for her to clock out anyway. You don't know the law, that's why you're here trying to blackmail me. If you did, you wouldn't have to resort to this nonsense. She paused, fixing him with a pointed glare. And since you know the law, you do know I could make a case against you. For blackmailing your own lawyer, for attempting to force me into illegal procedures, and for fraudulent behavior. She looked him straight in the eye, leaning slightly forward, mocking his posture. Oh, and I'd happily include how every piece of evidence you've provided me so far has been fake. How does that sound? His face twisted, and the next second she felt the pain in her entire back. A gasp left her mouth when his hand wrapped around her neck, hard enough to cut the supply of air. You know, he hissed, his face close enough for her to feel the heat of his breath on her skin. I knew you were a hard nut to crack. But now. He choked her. Harder. Now, you're just pissing me off. She clawed at his hands. Take your hands off me. But he ignored her, sneering. If only you knew when to shut your damn mouth, that we could have had a pleasant meeting. We both could have gotten what we wanted, but no. His voice venomous as he leaned in closer. You just have to be a bitch, don't you? She thrashed in his hold, trying to knee him, to push him off, but he grabbed her leg. He pinned it in place, pressing himself against her in a way that made her skin crawl. I tolerated your behavior because I respected your father. He was like my own, that he scoffed bitterly, but you? You're just a loose-mouthed little bitch. And I'm done tolerating you. Let me go, I growled, voice tight as she gasped for air. But instead of releasing her, he laughed a low, nasty sound that made her stomach tight. You think you're clever, he sneered, his hand moving higher up her leg reaching to her the skin color skirt she wore. Panic clawed at her, ball rising in her throat as she struggled harder as she felt his disgusting hands on her bare thigh. You're not. At the end of the day, you're just a woman, weak and pathetic. And me? I can ruin your entire career with a snap of my fingers. Just like I did to your husband. So stop being a b. The slap came out of nowhere, her hand acting before her mind caught up. Her palm cracked against his face with enough force to make his head snap to the side. But she didn't stop there. The second his grip loosened, she shoved him back with all the strength she could gather. He stumbled, cursing loudly, and she grabbed the first thing she could reach, a photo frame. Her favorite one, the picture of her and her father, and hurled it at him. It hit him square in the chest, and he staggered back, glaring at her with shock and anger. You're going to regret this, he hissed, rubbing his chest. She clenched her trembling fists. No, you're going to regret ever laying your filthy hands on me. And while we're at it, let me make this crystal clear, I'm done. I'm dropping your case. Go find someone else to do your dirty work because I'm not your damn puppet. She grabbed her bag and stormed toward the door. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest, half expecting him to lunge at her, grab her again, choke her until she couldn't breathe. The thought made her steps stumbled for just a second, but she didn't dare look back. To her surprise, and her relief, he didn't follow. She could feel his burning glare on her back. And can you believe that asshole had the nerve to call me incompetent? Me? Incompetent? Yoongi let out and scoff, running a hand through his messy hair. You probably deserve it. Jungkook said, standing near the car, leaning against the black hood, while Yoongi rattled on about his day. He barely listened, nodding once in a while. He doesn't really care whatever had happened in his life, he came in law firm to talk about things with Yoongi. But he better knew that his lawyer is awfully talkative. Yoongi glared at him, I can't even expect something from you. Did anyone tell you? You are a complete asshole? Heard it many times, nothing new. Come with a better insult next time. No, not that kind of simple asshole. You unlocked a whole new term of the assholes. Like, you're on some legendary level of being insufferable. A case study. 4 generations. He looked at the older man unimpressed. Or are you done? No, let me tell you how much I despise your ass, I would have kicked it long ago. If you weren't paying me a ridiculous amount of money. Jungkook ignored the jab, checking his watch with a disinterested expression. If you're done crying, I'm leaving. Hold up, Yoongi stepped in front of him. You're giving me a ride home. He blinked at him, voice flat. I'm not your driver. My wife took my car, so you are my only option. Come on, don't look at me like that. I'm not asking for your firstborn. Take a cab. Jungkook said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. In this economy? Are you insane? Come on, I do so much for you. The least you can do is take me home. It's like charity work, think of it as your good deed for the day. Jungkook jaw ticked. Fine. But if you so much as open your mouth during the ride, I'm kicking you out in the middle of the road. Deal. Yoongi said, satisfied, though Jungkook knew the man couldn't stay silent if his life depended on it. He turned to unlock the car, but something pulled his attention, a familiar figure entering the parking lot. At first, he was going to dismiss it, but something about the way she moved made me pause. It was her. He stared at her as she walked towards her car. Her head was down, her shoulders limped, and her steps were off, nothing like her usual confident walk. Something was wrong. What's with you? Are you going to stand here or unlock the CA? He stopped talking. He must have followed his gaze. Oh. What happened to her? He didn't respond. Because he doesn't know either. His feet were already moving. Before he could think, his entire focus locked on her. He vaguely heard Jungkook mutter something about taking a cab, but it barely registered. As he got closer, he noticed the tremble in her hands as she fumbled with her keys, trying to unlock her car door. Her movements were shaky, almost urgent. She didn't even acknowledge him yet. And his heart was picking up speed the closer he got. Without thinking, he reached out and grabbed her wrist, turning her toward him. The reaction was immediate and nothing like he'd accepted. She flinched hard, as if his touch burned her. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes, he froze. He could see the fear in her eyes, raw and unguarded, a look he never seen on her before. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. For a brief moment, he swore her eyes were glassy but didn't even got time to dwell on it before she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't hesitant or unsure, it was desperate. Her face pressed against his chest, and he felt her trembling against me. If he was frozen before, he turned into an ice cube now. He didn't know what to do, what to say. YN, who never showed vulnerability, was clinging to him like her life depended on it. His arms hovered awkwardly for a second before they moved on their own, wrapping around her carefully, as if she would shatter if he put a little pressure. Something happened, but what? His mind trying to piece the puzzle together. She pulled away after a few moments, her breathing uneven as she tried to take control of herself. Her hands fell from his coat, trembling slightly before she clenched them into fists at her sides. Her eyes darted away from his, as though she couldn't bear to hold his gaze anymore. He wanted to ask what happened, but a red mark on her neck. It wasn't small, they were big on her whole neck, angry, raw, and fresh. He thought he had experienced every kind of emotion life could throw at him. Anger, frustration, betrayal, grief, he had felt them all before. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for the storm that hit him in those 5 seconds. Who did this to you? He gritted out, forcing his eyes to meet hers. Her lips parted like she was about to say something, but her voice didn't seem to come out. She swallowed hard. Can we go home, please? She wasn't crying, but her voice, God, her voice. It was small, almost broken, and that shattered something inside him. This wasn't YN. Not the YN he knew. The YN he knew was strong. But now she felt small. Fragile. And he hated it. More than he should. I don't think I can drive, she added after some time, words shaky, gaze dropping to the ground again. He wanted to demand answers, to find whoever had done this and make them pay in ways they couldn't imagine. But right now, she needed him. Come on, he said, his voice calmer than he felt inside. Let's go. He guided her toward his car, keeping his steps slow and steady, though his mind was already plotting 100 scenarios, each more violent than the last. He was angry at her, furious, for what was happening between them. He didn't even saw her face for days. But everything disappeared at the moment. Every bitter thought, every word, it all faded the second she clung to him like he was her only lifeline. Whoever hurt her, they wouldn't get away with this. He would make sure of it.